Hey gang, and welcome to our third annual Movie Club Emporium Halloween Mega Binge. Like I said, this is our third annual, and we're keeping going with our tradition of every Halloween or around that area. I do a all-nighter with a larger horror movie franchise. First year we did Halloween. Second year, last year, we did the Friday the 13th franchise. So this year, we're going to jump into your worst nightmares with A Nightmare on Elm Street. So beginning now and going until we're done, we will be covering Nightmare on Elm Street 1 through New Nightmare. And we will also be covering the 2009 remake. And because I don't want to end on a bad note with the 2009 remake, spoilers for the rest of the evening, we will end the evening with the movie that spans two franchises. Hello, Amber. That spans two franchises and kind of bridges two of those together that we didn't do last year with Friday the 13th because there were already 11 movies in that set. So to round out the evening, we'll be doing Freddy vs. Jason. So I'm ready. I think I've got snacks. I've got lots of coffee. Not a lot of sleep, so I'll look the part, I guess. And we will be ready to start pretty soon. So jump on it. If you're new to the Mega Binge, the way these work differently than the other things we do is I do them live. So usually I'll post on Facebook between an hour, 30 minutes before the movie ends. And then I'll go live and do a quick review, my thoughts on that particular movie in each franchise, and we'll do that all night long until we're done. So sit back, relax, but don't get too relaxed because you'll doze off and then you're dead. As we jump into the first film of the evening, 1984's A Nightmare on Elm Street. See you guys after the movie. Alright, so Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. I gotta tell you, man, this movie still holds up. It is probably one of my favorite horror movies. Probably, it's at least in the top 10, maybe top 15 of all time. I gotta tell you, this Blu-ray transfer looks gorgeous. It's beautiful. So A Nightmare on Elm Street, there's obviously not a lot to say about this movie. This movie is a classic. It is a movie that definitely changed the horror genre. Maybe not the horror genre as much as the slasher genre, because up until now we had Leatherface, we'd had Michael Myers, we'd had Jason. Freddy brought something that the other movies didn't, and that was imagination. Now, not to say that those movies didn't have imaginative kills or anything like that, but Nightmare on Elm Street is really about what goes on in your head, your imagination, and to me that's something different. That's why I think this movie definitely still stands up today, as not just being a fun slasher movie that you watch. Because you grew up on them or not, but it definitely plays with a lot of adult themes for this movie. The movie that you don't really think about because you're dealing with Freddy and the glove and all that good stuff and the nursery rhyme, but this movie does have a lot of adult themes, whereas most other slasher movies, I said most, not all of them, are dealing with problems that kids are facing. Drugs, sex, stuff like that. So, the stuff that really gets the blood pumping. Whereas this movie, you look at parental neglect, alcoholism, murder, suicide, mental illness, and the idea of you're not able to trust the people closest to you because with the secret, like the parents of Elm Street, hide from the kids. What else are they hiding? So you lose that trust that between the parent and child. And also because what really I think you gloss over is it's a real throwaway line in the movie. It's right after Tina's death, because you see these kids and they're young adults portraying children, which is the case since time in memoriam. But they mention Tina's only being 15, and so it's one of those things like I never really noticed until watching it now, how much that changes the dynamic for Nancy and the others, because this isn't a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds off at summer camp. These are 15-year-olds dealing with these very adult issues, not just the stuff we mentioned, but then you also deal with Freddy's backstory, what they share, what they don't share. So there's a lot of adult themes in this movie. Also the idea of Eastern teachings, English, Eastern philosophy, the power of dreams, all this heavy stuff in this movie that you do forget about while you're watching it. And to me, that's what makes the movie work, because you don't think about all that heavy stuff, because Robert Englund is totally magnetic as Freddy. Heather Langenkamp is one of the top 3 scream queens of all time. Final Girls, whatever title you want to give them, she's top 3. And honestly, one of the unsung heroes of this movie is the score. Now, when you talk about horror movie scores, we can all agree on the major points. Number 1, Halloween is the most iconic of all time. Number 2, probably Harry Manfredini's Friday the 13th score is the most recognizable. Maybe Halloween, but I would go with the because you're gonna hear that a lot more times than you hear the piano picking of Halloween. Charles Bernstein's score for the Nightmare series is probably the most unsettling. Bar maybe Leatherface, because I don't remember there being much of a score in that film besides the noise. But yeah, his score for this movie is incredibly spot on for the movie. It's so haunting, the way he uses so many minors and plays notes wrongly on purpose that put you on edge. It really does play up the whole dream, like something, you're watching it and you're hearing it, but there's something not right, and it really does service this movie so well, more than I think it ever gets credit for. And then again, be having Wes Craven behind the helm, because as many bad movies the man made, movies that weren't well received by the horror community, there are other movies that really set a standard. And to have somebody who not only with this movie, but also with Last House on the Left, with Scream, changed the genre of horror 3 times. That can't be glossed over. And so, really what A Nightmare on Elm Street is a culmination of a franchise starting. You as much as my one complaint of this movie is that ending scene, because they tacked it on. There is a whole documentary you can watch, Never Sleep Again. It's like 6.5 hours long. Totally worth it if you're a Fred head. But they go into deep about the end of the ending stinger. But to me, this movie is so many parts coming together so perfectly at exactly the right moment in time and in pop culture that I don't know that maybe Scream in 94, 95, maybe 96, was able to capture again, to completely change the game in horror films. And so with that, it's clear that why this movie is regarded the way it is. Now there are, like I said, there are some problems with it that don't hold up, however many years later. Was it 20, 30, whatever? 34 years later? Almost 35 years later? There's some clunky acting. Some scenes that really don't play well. Scenes that are left in that are really bizarre. But all in all, The Nightmare on Elm Street is considered one of the best for a reason. And you don't need me to tell you that. So with that, let's move on to a year later. We're now in 1985, and we're going to be talking about how do you follow up Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, I don't make it gay. I don't know, but stay tuned because we're going to watch Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, and I will see you guys after that movie, and we'll talk about subtext. Bye. Alright, so, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, or Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. We could spend the rest of the night talking about all the subtext in this movie and about the way this movie is, I wouldn't say unofficially, but is quite possibly the most overtly homoerotic horror movie, and not in a bad way. This movie does, as for all the subtext involved, really is, when it came out at the time it did, it really is a testament to, that those voices being heard in a genre that very rarely caters to that community. So like I said, we can talk about that all the time. But let's talk about the movie itself and about the merits as a sequel. So here's the thing with Part 2. That I really noticed more watching it this time than I have previously. This is the movie that least likely feels like a Freddy movie. In the way that watching Nightmare 2 really feels like watching the later Hellraiser movies. And by that I mean it really feels like this was a movie. It was written without any involvement of Freddy Krueger whatsoever. Because this movie is a possession movie. It's a haunted house possession movie. And we then feel like we add elements of Freddy Krueger to it, setting it in that Elm Street house. And so it really, in a way, feels disconnected, especially from the first movie, and which is weird because this is a direct sequel to that movie. Usually when you run into this, like with Hellraiser, it's the later films, but this one feels like it automatically, like just right off the bat, for whatever reason. A lot of the reason is, number one, the writer wrote this story with all this other subtext going on, and it really feels like that is what is at the forefront of this movie, and which is great and fine, but it pushes Freddy to the background in his own sequel. Also, the director, which I'm a fan of Jack Shoulder. If you've never seen The Hidden, you are missing out on a sci-fi classic. The Hidden is amazing. Alone in the Dark is a very creepy movie from the 80s that he directed. This doesn't feel like those movies, because it feels like if you've ever heard Jack Shoulder interview, he wasn't a fan of the first Nightmare on Elm Street, and so he just kind of wanted to do his own thing. And in a movie that really is honestly the building of the franchise, because you have the first movie, it's a hit, we want to make more. your second movie has to be that franchise builder, and this movie doesn't do that. So for this movie to kind of fail at being a franchise builder and still be part two of a 7-8 part franchise is impressive. A lot of that has to do with what we'll get into in the next few movies, but again, it's just, this movie is not a bad movie. If you watch it out of context of this being a Freddy Krueger driven movie, much like Halloween 3, but this movie actually has to do with Freddy, but a movie that doesn't have to do with necessarily the franchise it's in. Because if you look at Nightmare 2 as just one giant allegory for discovering, yourself, your wants, your needs, your sexuality, all that stuff. If you take that as the basis of this movie, and then use the allegory of haunted house, possession, and literally there's something inside you that you keep from the world, but is still fighting its way to the surface. That's a powerful message, and it just doesn't really work in context of a Freddy movie, because even with there only have been one movie prior, Freddy's rules are still pretty prominent. And so this movie, ignoring all those rules, and in light of what it does, is, I don't want to say frustrating, because it's not a frustrating movie, and it's still a good movie. It's just weird that this is the second movie in this franchise. And not only that, but that while this movie deviates wholeheartedly from the mythos, that what little mythos has been established, there's still a franchise. And so I think, if anything, that's kudos to the character of Freddy and the how quickly he was accepted and beloved by the horror community. You can hear it in the act, whether they didn't want to bring Robert Englund back because it's just a guy in makeup. And how there's a few scenes left in the movie where it's a different guy playing Freddy, and it's not Freddy, which we'll get to much later in the series. But, yeah, like I said, overall, Nightmare 2 is still an interesting watch. It's such an interesting watch. And it's one that I do hope is looked at as groundbreaking, that is looked at as a study. It's just kind of a weird entry in this franchise. Having said that, it's still a really fun horror movie. And the trope of having your final girl be this, man, this young boy, is well done. And Mark Patton is great in this movie. Robert Russler is great in this movie. Like I said before, it's just such a weird entry into this franchise, because this being the second movie, you don't expect it to deviate so much from what little mythos there is, and yet and not kill the franchise. But as we can tell by the hours I have left, this franchise does fine, even though with the weird stumbling block that is the second movie. And again, I only say stumbling block of the story of Freddy, because this is still a great, interesting horror movie. It's just a really weird entry in this franchise. But yeah, so that's Nightmare 2. Again, like I said, we could fill up a whole night for talking about the symbolism, the subtext, what they call subtext that is way up front text behind Nightmare 2. But again, I'll direct you to the Never Sleep Again documentary, because they do dive into that with the writer of the movie himself and what he was trying to say about himself, about his own sexuality, and how he used this movie to kind of tell that kind of a story, which is honestly, like I said, very interesting for this time, in the early 80s, early to mid 80s, because we just simply as a nation weren't talking about that. I think had not quite got to the epidemic of AIDS, and so that community wasn't really being acknowledged by anybody. And so for them to not only do it in a horror movie, but do it in a big, blooming franchise like this, again, like I said, is an interesting study. It's just a weird entry in this movie. But let's take a turn. Like, this franchise is going to take a turn, because we are on the turn of when this franchise goes from, well, that was a fun little horror movie, to this thing takes over, because we are jumping into A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, The Dream Warriors. So let's dive into, probably, honestly, gonna go ahead and spoil it, probably one of my favorite entries in the series, because this movie is so incredibly 80s. So pick out your favorite dream costume, what's your superpower if you're an X-Men, and let's get watching, and I will see you guys after the movie. Bye. Hi, Sarah. Bye. We're the Dream Warriors! So, you're welcome. Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. So, like I said earlier, this is probably one of my favorites of the series. It is definitely where the franchise turns. Going from a just straight horror film to really beginning the Freddy that we all know and still love today, with the quips and the one-liners. And honestly, I feel that as kind of outplayed as it becomes, when we get to the later of the original series, this is definitely a change that had to happen, because honestly, it's what sets Freddy apart from everybody else, and mostly because he is the killer that can talk. And so giving him that attitude, that swagger, does change the franchise, and I think it does change it for the better. Also, the idea of allowing the kids to have a means to fight back in their dreams, definitely pushes this franchise forward. Because up until now, with the first one and the second one, it was always, while effective, always kind of just what you consider a standard slasher, but you're dying in your dreams instead. Part 3 gives us the really inventive kills, whether it's the marionette death, which is still really an effective looking effect, with the tendrils walking the boy to his death, the television death, stuff like that. It really is the most, or when it starts becoming very inventive, and also as outlandishly inventive as the series becomes. To me, this is the peak, somewhat of the peak of that. Well, I'll explain in the later movies, but because this is honestly the peak for, I believe, the makeup effects. I think Freddy never looks better than he does in Part 3. I think it's Kevin Yeager's makeup is when you think of Freddy, you think of this makeup. And while I appreciate some of the tones he took in Part 2, which kind of went more of a witch looking makeup effect, I think that this Part 3 makeup is the best Freddy has ever looked or will look going forward. Also, the way Chuck Russell directs these outlandish set pieces. The giant penis head Freddy, or again the television death, all that, and you can see that kind of that balance he does of kind of cheesy, but also very gory, very frightening. It's prevalent in his remake of The Blob, which I think is a great remake. Even into the more family friendly version of The Mask with Jim Carrey that he does balance that line between super cheesy cornball and really effective of filmmaking. And well, I do like the idea of this potentially being Wes Craven's idea for a swan song for the franchise. It's kind of the reason he really came back was to kind of end it. We all see how that goes by how much time is left in my night. But I would be interested to read that original script because I've heard it's very dark, very brutal. That he took Freddy even more brutal than Freddy had been. And instead, what Darabont, who co-wrote this with Russell, does is kind of pushes... I won't say this movie's a light movie. It is not a very light movie. Again, we're dealing with teenagers dealing with very adult themes, whether it's drug abuse, suicide, prescription medications, all this stuff that this movie covers. But it does make it more of a ride for the audience. Whereas the first one's a genuine horror movie. The second one, like I've said my piece on, this movie is the first one that becomes a ride. And it's a ride you want to take again and again. I think this is why this is the one most people gravitate to, because it is the one that most feels like a roller coaster. And that's what you want in a lot of horror movies. And I think that movie's what this movie does perfectly. I honestly don't have a lot of complaints in this movie. My only big complaint has to do with Heather Langenkamp, who is great as Nancy. And we've seen it in the first movie. We'll see it later on with New Nightmare. She embodies this character to a T. However, for whatever reason, the reason she was contractually obligated to do this movie after she only signed on because Wes was doing it, I don't know. But you kind of get the sense that in a lot of scenes she might be phoning it in, and that's a shame, especially with this until part 7 was Nancy's swan song, to kind of have her go out on kind of a mediocre again. But also the death of Freddy in this movie feels more permanent than it does in part 1. Maybe not in part 2. I still say, and I didn't say it originally, but if you watch part 2, for whatever you think about it, it still, to me, has one of the best Freddy deaths in the franchise. Him dying again in the fire, I think, is perfect. And the wax dummy melting the way it does. But in part 3, again, the idea of introducing Catholic magic into the movie with holy water and crucifixes, and it really does play it really adds a more Christian element into the franchise, which is weird considering the first movie is so much steeped in Eastern mythology with dreams and just where Wes Craven got the idea from. If you've ever heard the story of the where the idea for Nightmare came from, so it is where they take it to the very opposite end of Eastern spiritualism to very much a Western Christian backstory. Making his mother a nun who was raped by 100 maniacs. But again, it is the most ride of the movies, and I think that again is why, above all, it is probably the most popular of the sequels because of that, and it's definitely the most rewatchable. But this is where we kind of do our mid arc. You'll notice we talked about it when we did the Friday movies with Tommy Jarvis, or Halloween with Jamie Lloyd, where for whatever reasons the middle of the franchise decides to start being linear. And so we are going to follow a through line for the next 3 movies. Well, part 3, 4, and 5 will follow a kind of a linear story. So let's jump into the middle piece of that trilogy. And this is what Robert Englund affectionately calls the MTV Nightmare. And I think we'll definitely be discussing why. So stay tuned for Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master. And I will see you. Calm down. He's too excited. I'll see you guys after the movie. Alright, so The Dream Master, Nightmare on Elm Street 4. Like I said in the last review, Robert Englund calls Part 4 the MTV Nightmare. For a lot of reasons, he's absolutely correct. Number one is the music in this movie is outrageous. For a movie like Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4 to contain music from Billy Idol, Blondie, a solid favorite of mine, Drama Rama. Check out Anything, it's a good song. But yeah, it is weird that there's so much like big name music in this movie. And then also it's kind of the MTV movie because of the way director Renny Harlin shoots it. Now, if you know Renny Harlin, you've seen a lot of his movies, Die Hard 2, Cliffhanger, another horror sequel, Exorcist the Beginning. And the thing about Renny Harlin, which is kind of a dual-edged sword with me and Renny Harlin, is he's very much a quick edit director. There are so many cuts in this movie. This movie is shot like a music video, especially the final confrontation. It looks like it's on the set of White Wedding. It's ridiculous. But the thing that this movie does have in it, to me, is the introduction of the character of Alice, played by Lisa Wilcox. Because we are given the 3 survivors, Joey Kincaid and Kristen, but they're dispatched pretty unceremoniously and pretty quickly, which is sad because Kincaid was kind of one of my favorites from Nightmare 3. But so we're given this new character, which is Alice, and to me, aside from maybe Heather, Nancy, Lisa Wilcox's Alice has probably the best story arc in the entire series. Because we see her with her brother. She's a very mousy, very private, quiet girl. And because of the deaths of her friends, whether it be she's the Dream Master or what have you, she is able to take their spirit into herself and use their power together to fight Freddy. And that's kind of an interesting take on it, and the way to incorporate the dream power, which we established in part 3, but whittling it down into that final girl that these movies call for, as opposed to the team movie. This movie also really amps up the silly kills. Not all of them are silly, but this one has the big cockroach kill, or the brother who dies fighting Invisible Freddy in a dojo. Like, it's really bizarre. But again, Freddy rides that line in this movie still of being really charming, being real quippy, with also still having scary moments. But you can see this movie sets the tone for where we're going to go. because he's a lot more charming in this movie than he is sometimes scary. And I think while part 3 carries that balance very well, this one not as great. And as we'll get on heading to the finish now, we're almost halfway through, we start to see that Freddy really is the icon, maybe more so than the killer. And that works for what Freddy does with the way he dispatches these teens, but you do lose some of that menace in the next couple of films. So it is kind of not kind of a disappointment thing, because there are still some great spots in this movie and in the movies coming up. But I again, like I said, part 3 kind of crests that hill of being perfectly scary and fun, whereas part 4 is more rock and roll than it is scary. And a lot of that, again, has to do with choices like the way it's cut, the idea of this woman who is using, she has the powers of her friends, but it makes her strong and it makes her know karate to fight Freddy. And just the idea of how much at the height of his power Robert Englund is as his character. The idea of Freddy Krueger wearing sunglasses on a beach, like he's James Bond, is fitting with Robert Englund's portrayal of Freddy as we've gone forward. But the charm of Freddy is starting to outshine the menace of Freddy, and so we're gonna see how that progresses. Yeah, thank you. We're gonna see how that charm over menace progresses into what'll be the final Alice story. The 3-story arc of the Dream movies, as I call them, the Dream Warriors, Dream Master, and then what we're gonna get to next, which is the Dream Child, which is, man, if you thought dying in your sleep was scary, imagine being a first-time parent. So let's see how you deal with that and Freddy Krueger. And I will see you guys after the movie. Alright, so Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. We are officially over halfway done. And this movie really is disappointing with it being the final of the Dream trilogy within the franchise. Honestly, this movie, the problems I brought up with playing up Freddy's charm over his menace from part 4, this movie does it almost like they tried to reconcile it, but unfortunately what they did was the stuff with Freddy and Lisa Wilcox's character Alice, and that A storyline does have lots and lots of very creepy moments, a lot of horrific energy, a lot of ideas that the movie is trying to portray, whether it's the fear of dealing with your firstborn child and the loss of, the other parent, becoming a single parent while still being pregnant. That's a terrifying thought. What circumstance does abortion play in the plan? Heavy themes, eating disorders, things like that. And And so the stuff with Alice and Freddy and Jacob the baby are very interesting. You know, the idea that, you know, babies dream roughly 70% of the time when they're in the womb as they're growing and maturing is an interesting place to take this franchise based on dreams. Here's where this movie doesn't work as well as it could, because all that stuff with Freddy and Alice and all that stuff is great because it takes it kind of back to its serious tone. It also helps that Stephen Hawkins, the director, Hopkins, goes for a very gothic look with all that stuff. There's doves, slow-mo like we're watching a John Woo movie, and cathedral-like sculptures and stained glass windows and weird labyrinth staircases, and all that plays great. However, when you do get to the kills of the movie, whether it's Dan or the friends, who honestly I don't remember their names, and that's the first movie we really don't remember anybody's name. Excuse me. Because the deaths in this movie are so over the toply comical. Whether it is Dan becoming like the Wraith or Hardware to end it with a motorcycle accident, or Greta being force-fed herself, sitting in a high chair at the dinner table from Beetlejuice, waiting for them to start breaking out and singing Deo, or the comic book kid who was killed by the comic book superhero version of Freddy Krueger in a Take On Me music video. It's just so weird that the kills are played so cartoonishly while very serious issues are being dealt with in the main story. Again, like I said, what Stephen Hopkins does, the design is incredible. Like I said, the Dream Cathedral, or the Labyrinth Stairs, or the final confrontation with Freddy is so grotesquely beautiful and is done very, very well. The slow motion dubs are cheesy, but all in all, it really is shot amazingly. But then again, you get these deaths that are so kiddie. And I mean that in the sense that, they are very much feel like juvenile. They're juvenile deaths in this movie. This honestly could be one. And I think this is the reason why the franchise does dip suddenly. Because 3 is such a high. 4 is still kind of right there. You're still kind of along for the ride. And then 5 just kind of pulls the rug out from under you a little bit, leading into Part 6, which we'll get into very soon. So, as for Part 5, it's not... I think it's the worst performing of the series. However, I don't feel it's the worst movie in the series. I still enjoy The Dream Child, mostly because of the look of it, what Stephen Hopkins does with the look of it. And it does touch on some really interesting themes. Now, while this movie does really ramp up the cartoon aspect of the deaths, it does not hold a candle to what we're going to talk about next, because it's time to watch what was initially the death of Freddy Krueger, both thematically and box office, because we're going to get ready to talk about the kind of a mess Freddy's Dead. See, you know it's not good when it starts with not Nightmare on Elm Street. So we're getting ready for Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare. Even though there are 3 movies after this, but again, not the Nightmare on Elm Street, and it says final in the title. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you guys after the movie. Bye. So Freddy's not dead. This is not the final nightmare. Also, this is probably, up until the remake, probably the lowest point in the series for Freddy and the gang. For whatever reason, I don't know. I understand why they would try to end it. Decide to end, especially after the dwindling box office of Part 5. Again, I defend a lot of Part 5. When you hear the stories about what was pitched for Part 6, whether it be Peter Jackson or David Scow or any of the other writers, Robert D. Moore from Battlestar Galactica, the ideas that were had, especially the idea of introducing this Manson-like cult of Freddy followers. The idea that we went with what they go with for the 6th, and at the time, final movie, is a little bizarre, because for whatever reason we decided to make Part 6 a David Lynch knockoff. And I say it mostly because of the Springwood stuff. When they go to Springwood, this movie blatantly rips off Twin Peaks and all the worst tropes about it. All the things that you make fun of in a show like that. Whereas, instead we're given this convoluted, all of a sudden Freddy's got a kid, which brings up so many more questions about Freddy's crimes than you really want to deal with. We deal with the low end of deaths, with the exception of Carlos. Carlos's hearing aid death is very effective. The rest of the deaths in this movie are not good. And you deal with cameos of the people who are in this movie. Is such a time capsule, to its detriment, because between who's in this movie and the things we were referencing, like the Power Glove and stuff like that, it just doesn't hold that kind of timeless feeling like the best of these movies do. And sadly, what made Freddy so popular, even at the expense of the fear Freddy is supposed to have, this movie gets rid of both the charm and the fear, and instead it's, he becomes Bugs Bunny, and that doesn't work for trying to make a scary movie. Also, this is, to me, the lowest point for the makeup. He looks like a cartoon, which fits his acting, and then the acting of the others, with the most terrifying part of this movie being what is Yaphet Kotto doing in this movie? Because again, with the exception of maybe the kid who plays Carlos, this movie acting is, and then Yaphet Kotto. I really don't have a lot to say about this movie because it is quite literally, if you remove the remake, which most people do, this is the lowest of low points for the Nightmare franchise. It is. But then again, having said that, if you're going to introduce your child or somebody to the horror genre and kind of wing them in, no, I can't even say that because it is cartoonish, but the story is not good either. So, you can't even use it for that. What's really sad too is that this is supposed to be the last one. But thankfully it's not. Thankfully we had a homecoming of some sort because Wes Craven returns to kind of help push us through the sour taste of part 6, because we're going to talk about the super meta, the way before its time, the movie that led to Scream and the rebirth of Wes Craven, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. So making Freddy scary again. And does he do it? Let's find out. And I'll see you guys after the movie. Okay, so Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Now, I do think that Part 3, The Dream Warriors, is my favorite of the sequels to the original film. With the exception of this movie. Because this movie's so ahead of its time. I mean, we're a couple years removed before Scream really takes this notion of taking the tropes of the horror movie, turning them on its ear, and acknowledging them while also falling for most of them. Also the use of meta in this movie. I do love the kind of the blurry lines of fact and fiction and the use of honestly, of making Freddy downright terrifying, probably scarier than he's been since the original. Yeah, some people don't like the look of him and the weird thumb claw, or the weird, like, German expressionistic look of him, but no, I think we genuinely made Freddy terrifying again. We still get a little bit of the lines that kind of keep Freddy, but it's back to full-blown malice, and you forget, especially after the last movie, how much you miss that. Heather Langenkamp in this movie is incredible because the weight of this movie success it's completely on her. If she doesn't work, this whole film doesn't work. You have to be able to be with her as both Heather Langenkamp, wife, mother, actress, and Nancy Thompson, horror movie survivor. And the amount of emotion and the amount of strain she puts on herself throughout this movie is incredible. And really is probably her greatest performance ever. Um, and boy, just if it isn't creepy seeing Miko Hughes, he'll always forever be Gage Creed to me, or the little boys have a penis kid from Kindergarten Cop. It's a toss up. So, but no, he's great in this movie. He's so beyond his years in acting as a child. Or even when you add and throw in actors, have Craven playing himself, Robert Englund playing himself, Robert Shea, the head of New Line, playing themselves. And so many years later, was it 10 years later? So, honestly, without this movie, I don't think we see movies like the new Halloween. Because number one, you have to create a precedent for it. And granted, this movie more, again, Screamo is more to this movie than maybe the new Halloween, but there are definitely seeds there that may not happen without this film. But yeah, and then the ending with, the idea of Freddy being a demon that was captured in fiction. And that goes back to, ancient times when one of the, reasons early man told stories, because to entertain each other, but also to keep each other safe. And so I love that notion. And then, of course, the whole allegory of Hansel and Gretel and the old Grimm fairy tales is so... Maybe it's sometimes a little too on the nose, but I do appreciate it. Again, it's just so much of... You look at this movie... excuse me. And on one hand, you're watching a Lifetime movie. You're watching this poor mother deal with the death of her husband, her fledgling acting career, and the idea that her son might be somewhat emotionally disturbed because of her acting choices. And if they share a psychosis. And meanwhile, there's also a Freddy movie. And there's a Freddy movie that gives you the ceiling death and the catchphrases and that weird, ball scratching in the car scene to REM. So again, it subverts the genre while also giving you everything from the genre that you love. And I really do love that. I do love this movie. I think it's criminally underappreciated. But that's my one tired opinion. Alright, so we're almost done. We've got 2 more movies, and one of them I'm actually looking forward to. This next one, however, is not it, because it's time, unfortunately, to deal with one bit of business that honestly I've been dreading all night, and that's the 2009 remake. I've only seen this movie twice, and I'm not looking forward to a third. So, bear with me, and we'll try to get through this together. And here we go. I'll see you guys after the movie. Bye. Alright, so let's talk about the 2009 remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Before we get really deep into it, I do want to go over some of the positives. There are a couple of things I do appreciate from this movie. One is most of the opening scene, even though the dialogue is terrible, I do appreciate the look of that opening scene. I think it really tried to set a tone that unfortunately did not work at all. The other thing I enjoy about this movie that I appreciate, I don't want to say enjoy, but I appreciate, is introducing the idea of micronaps. That after so long without sleep, your brain will just start to knock itself out in short bursts to start trying to contain energy. And I don't think any of the other Nightmare movies ever really touch on that. And really the only good scene in the movie is Rooney Mara's Nancy going through the micronaps while in the grocery store while you hear the Everly Brothers' Dream play. That's a really cool effect. I did like that. And thirdly, man, watching this movie, I feel like one of the executive producers must have felt watching this movie, because all I can think about is, man, Jackie Earle Haley was really good as Rorschach in Watchmen, wasn't he? I like Jackie Earle Haley, and I think, honestly, he is probably the best part of this movie. Unfortunately, he's just playing Rorschach. Also, the idea that having Freddy especially noticeable in part 2, where Freddy is shorter than some of the kids he's trying to chase and terrify. Even more so is Jackie Earle Haley. But yeah, for when him as Freddy, cat face makeup and all, is what it looks like. Every time I see his makeup, I think of Sleepwalkers. He really is going for it, even if it is just him being Rorschach again. Man, the rest of this movie is hot garbage. The biggest problem with this movie, if I had to pick one, isn't the script. It's not the execution. It's not even the fact that it's a Platinum Dunes release. I mean, I am somebody who, for having been branded early on as somebody who was anti-remake, I've defended most of their remakes. I think their Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake is a great update of that movie. I particularly like the Friday the 13th remake. It's a fun movie that pays homage to all the other Friday the 13th movies while still remaking that film. This movie is so pretentious. This movie, to use the phrase douchey feels like it was invented for this movie, because you have a director who I honestly haven't seen, like I've seen anything before or since, who thought, no, I know I can make Nightmare on Elm Street good, even though I know what it's missing. Really amped up pedophilia. And it was signed off on by so many people. The fact that, yeah, if you know this story, you know Freddy was a child murderer. We got that. I'm not stupid, I know what that means. But for this movie to just really, go all in on... Granted, they're different times, I know. And that may have not necessarily been something that was looked out for back then. Although there was, because they apparently was in the original script, but they toned it down because there was a big case going on. But man, the amount of just like Law and Order SVU shenanigans that go in this movie involving Freddy Krueger touching kids, and they do it to make him creepier, and it doesn't. This movie doesn't feel creepy or scary. This movie feels sleazy, and it's a 2009 release, and it's a major remake of one of the top franchises in horror history. Maybe let's not amp up the sleaze factor, but man, they'd go for it. And I don't know all the situation, but come on, man. If an actor or an actress, this is just me not knowing the business, just telling you what I see. If you are a filmmaker or producer and you have an actor or actress that for whatever reason has decided that they no longer want to be in the work that you are making or producing, let them go, because holding them contractually to be in your thing is never gonna pay off. And you can tell, because Rooney Mara, for the longest time, I thought was the worst actress based on this movie, until I saw movies like Side Effects and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and some others. Rooney Mara is great, and she could not want to be in this movie less. And it shows, and she is she is Bruce Willising her way through this movie so hard, it's insane. And again, that's the star of your movie. That's what you want, is for the star of your movie. I should say, Jackie Earle Haley is the star of this movie. The female lead of this movie, to just go through scene by scene, giving 0 Fs. It doesn't work, and she is terrible in this movie, but it's not. I can't see it being just on her, because I've seen her be amazing in so many other things. Almost every other thing I've seen her in. And so it comes down to what changed for her, and why they didn't just try to recast. And that's the other thing with this movie is, yes, for Texas Chainsaw and Friday the 13th, we really prettied up the cast. It's the mid to late, mid 2000s before we hit the 2010, and it works so well for all those movies like Scream going forward, and so to have the pretty cast is fine. But these kids, and I say kids in the loosest as close as you can, when like 23-year-olds are playing high school kids, are just sleepwalking through this movie with some of the cringiest dialogue. And then you have moments that set up these iconic moments from the series, while also not paying them off. It's like another not great remake, which is Ghostbusters. Like, you cannot you cannot do scene for scene recreations of the original while still trying to sell it as new stuff. It doesn't work that way. You just confuse the audience who doesn't know, because it's a weird tone shift, and you've angered the people who do know it. It's so bizarre. Man, this movie sucks. It sucks so bad. It's a movie that if I was 100% anti-remake, man, Exhibit A, look at this. I have now seen this movie 3 times, and I can say, hopefully and thankfully, with this review, I don't have to watch it again. So yeah, while Friday the 13th 6 is, or not Friday the 13th, that's how early it is. Nightmare on Elm Street 6 is not a good movie. There's a lot of problems in Dream Child. This is far and away the worst movie with the name Freddy Krueger you'll ever see. And this movie would be better off if we all pretended it didn't exist. Because there can't be anybody who enjoys this movie. I would love to speak with someone who actually enjoys this remake, because it is atrocious. It looks cheap. It looks, well, most of the kills and stuff look cheap because CG blood, baby. We're too busy talking about, kids now, man. We take we're all pilled out and all this, and it's just whatever, man. It doesn't work. This movie fails at every turn. And the fact that it went through so many hands, you eventually think they would have polished the turd with how many hands this movie went through, but they didn't. It's still a turd. But there's a reason, and this is the reason, why this is not the final movie of the night, because I don't want to end angry and tired. So, the movie that spans 2 seasons of Halloween Mega Binge, we're going to end the night with. So we've got one more movie. Again, the reason I did it this year, not last year, was I was already having to sit through 11 Jason movies. So why not put Freddy vs. Jason on this year's? So let's finish strong. Let's wrap up this year's Halloween Mega Binge with 2003's, 2004's epic Clash of the Titans in the spirit of Kramer versus Kramer, BVS, AV. Man, none of those movies ever work out. Oh, well, we're talking about Freddy vs. Jason. See you guys after the movie. Hey, we made it. So we finally hit the end. Our final movie tonight, or this morning. 2004's Freddy vs. Jason. So, again, like I said earlier, the reason I put this movie at the end, 2 reasons. One, really didn't want to end on the garbage that is the remake of Nightmare on Elm Street. Also, we didn't do this movie last year. Hi, Jenny. We didn't do this movie last year because there was already 11 Jason movies to watch, so I thought we'd put it off till this year with the good morning. Kind of spread it out. So Freddy vs. Jason is a movie that at the absolute best is a guilty pleasure. I remember seeing this in the theater and seeing it a few times since. I haven't seen it in a few years now, but yeah, it is. This movie's a guilty pleasure because, and when you think of most versus movies, they are, depending on what 2 icons you're pushing together. Because there's no reason for Freddy and Jason to be together. Besides the fact that, there was a tease in Freddy or Jason 9. But I do appreciate that they finally went, after 15 years, they finally did go through and make this movie. Granted, it would be a whole other video, probably an hour or longer, about the different versions of this movie, from the normal ones to where they're in a contest in hell, to the weird ones where Jason was one of the Elm Street kids that Freddy diddled. Then those scripts exist. But I do appreciate the way they were able to tie both franchises together. And honestly, Freddy probably is one of the best parts of this movie. Because you can kind of tell, like, this is, for now anyway, Robert Englund's swan song playing the character on film. We now know he played him a couple of evenings ago on the Goldbergs, and now he's, after the success of the new Halloween, he says, well, maybe I've got one more Freddy in me. Which would be interesting. Honestly, I'd like to see them do the Peter Jackson's version now that we have older man Freddy. But this movie, you go to this movie because you want to see Freddy versus Jason, which is good because the human characters in this movie are terrible. All of them are. From either being kind of walking cliches, like our protagonist, or Jason Ritter's character, or even the weird nerd kid, or the weird, like, Jay from Clerks knockoff stoner kid, to absolutely unlikable, like Kelly. I just lost her last name, from Destiny's Child. Her best friend character in this movie, who's insanely unlikable. Yeah, you're going to this movie because you want to see the two fight, and honestly, when that happens at the end, it is a big payoff. The problem with this movie is you spend most of the time with these humans that, you know, the kids in the movie, rightfully so, but they're not likable. Not any of them. And also the weird fluctuation of tone. You watch, and this is a movie that a director will come to again in a different franchise with a different movie, but you have moments of really genuine horror, whether it's the fact that now we're doing this thing where all the children who are the ghosts of Freddy's victims are all eyeless. Like, that's a horrifying visual. To, there's a giant Freddy caterpillar who's smoking a hookah, or a big Freddy shadow monster that just looks terrible. And then when you do get to the action, it's so cross-cut, so quick-cut that you don't really kind of feel what's going on. And like I said, a lot of that comes from Ronnie Yu, who is a director. Also, it's a weird shift tone, and it comes from somebody who you can tell didn't watch either franchise, doesn't care about either franchise, and it shows. I mean, if you go, and the tone of the franchises don't matter to him, which we'll talk about when we eventually get to the Child's Play movies, because he made Bride of Chucky, which to me is the same problem, where we aren't really paying service to the actual tone of the franchise, just to make it feels like a shallow entry in both instances. Yeah, it may be the most profitable probably for both franchises, but also the most shallow. But again, like I said, this is probably one of my most guilty pleasures, because it's Freddy and Jason, and they're fighting to a really kind of awesome, like, metal soundtrack, like early to mid 2000s metal. Like, man, High School Jason loved this soundtrack. Thanks, Roadrunner Records. And the soundtrack, to me, still holds up. I still have the soundtrack, and hearing some of the songs in the movie. And if you're into that music, it's probably one of the best soundtracks out there. I don't know. Again, this movie is 100% a guilty pleasure. What's he doing in there? Cadrick's mad at me because we haven't gone to bed yet. It's a guilty pleasure at best. And at worst, it kind of feels like they finally get their stuff together long enough for a cash grab. But whatever side of the fence you're on, it's not the worst. It at least knows to give you Robert Englund and as Freddy, and it is an okay entry for both franchises. So at the end of the day, it's kind of all you can take, and it kind of does pay homage to the spirit of both franchises. And with these movies, that's all you can ask for, is that you respect kind of what both franchises are, even if you don't necessarily follow the rules of the said franchises or the logistics of said franchises, because you can't get from Ohio to New Jersey in like a 45-minute van ride. But it's okay, you forgive it. But man, it's hard to forgive that big caterpillar monster though, because that just, and I guarantee you on Blu-ray, that CG does not hold up. That's it. We've done it. All 9 Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I am exhausted. So if you're still curious about anything Nightmare Elm Street related, do yourself a favor. It's on both formats of discs. It used to be on Netflix. I'm not sure if it still is. I know it's on Amazon and Shudder. Check out Never Sleep Again, The Nightmare Legacy. It's a 6.5-hour documentary, and it covers every movie step by step of Nightmare on Elm Street with tons of interviews with the filmmakers, the writers, the actors, everybody. And it will give you all the information you ever wanted about Nightmare on Elm Street. In fact, I may turn it on after we finish here. Mostly because documentaries will help me kind of nod off. So, we still have lots to go. Halloween isn't here yet. And honestly, I've never really needed a day of the month to tell me when I can and can't watch horror movies. So, stay tuned. I know coming up, there's still a couple of podcast episodes to record. Still have a few house shows to do before Halloween, hopefully. And then we're getting into the heart of the theater reviews, so lots to do. But it is fun to come back for the Halloween Mega Binge. I will say next year, I'm not sure what we're doing, or what I'll be doing. As far as the next Halloween Mega Binge, I may take a smaller franchise next year, but I want to get some of the bigger ones out of the way first, and we'll go from there. So until next time, thank you guys for watching, especially those of you who kind of popped in throughout the night, because it was a long evening. Not as long as some, but still, it's a while. So I will see you guys next time. It's time to put this. It's time to put this Halloween Mega Binge to bed. Sweet dreams. Bye.